They say in journalism, never become the story. Today, I am breaking that cardinal rule at the urging of Fox, not Lawrence, but the producer sitting across from me. Yesterday, I took part in a discussion on Sky News that was supposed to be about the misogyny platformed by Lawrence Fox and Dan Wootton on GB News. I was assured by a producer ahead of time that this was a discussion, not a debate. But a minute to air, I was suddenly told that now not only was I taking part in a debate, it wasn't going to be focused on misogyny, but instead, quote, the limitations of free speech. Here's what happened next.
Why is this so much worse than other comments we might hear from people like Lawrence Fox or others? Why does this, for so many people, tip over the edge of reasonable comment?
I want to address something here. Speech is free. They said what they said because they have free speech. They have freedom of expression. However, when you're a broadcaster, you're guided by broadcasting codes. Now, the two presenters are being investigated under normal procedures that go ahead. They may not be found to have breached any broadcasting codes, whether internally or whether Ofcom complaints are taken forward. However, to pose another question, should we not be discussing instead why two broadcasters on a platform that claims it has aspirations to be the next BBC would want to exercise their right to free speech with that exchange? And should we not also be talking about the fact that misogyny was used as a vehicle? Lawrence Fox showed on social media the exchanges that had gone on before they talked about that on air. Dan Wootton issued a full apology claiming they didn't know anything about it. It was an off-the-cuff moment. Lawrence Fox showed text messages and producer setups beforehand that had outlined what exactly he was going to say about Ava Evans. And I do think this is, as Ava herself has said, a production issue. This is where it becomes entertainment. And I think there's an example sitting here. You know, I was invited on tonight to talk about misogyny in media. Then I was told we were going to have a discussion in general. A minute before broadcast, suddenly this is a debate about free speech. It doesn't make any sense to me. My focus here is the misogyny and why that became an entertainment vehicle.
Now, I'm not new to the media. I may look young, but I'm sadly not new. I know the old bait and switch happens, but I think we have as a duty as journalists to explain to the public why they might be seeing countless repetitive media discussions framed in this polarizing way instead of talking about the real issues at hand, which in this case was misogyny.
What is your problem with that then? Right. Specifically, the comments made by Lawrence Fox about misogyny.
What is my problem with Lawrence Fox saying something so disgustingly misogynistic that is being broadcast to an audience while his fellow broadcaster laughs along? And the only thing that he says in the defense of this woman is she's very beautiful, which is more misogyny. It's the idea that women in all these walks of life are being disrespected on a fundamental level. It's baked in to our society. It's baked into our media. It's baked into the social media that people are consuming. There's a reason that, organizations that work in schools with young people are reporting a huge increase in misogyny and rape culture. It comes from the top down. Young children are seeing this from social media influencers, and they grow up and they see it from these adult politics influencers. Lawrence Fox has founded a political party. He asked us to take him seriously, and yet he's saying stuff like that. And you've got people coming on here defending his right to free speech. Well, he had the right to free speech. He said it very freely. He is now just finding the consequences of the free speech and an investigation that would follow anyone potentially breaking broadcasting codes.
Notice the bizarre decision there by Sky to show a headshot of Ava Evans after I mentioned Dan Wootton's only defense of her was to say, actually, Lawrence Fox, she is very beautiful. Ergo, she has sex appeal. A woman's worth, remember, is rooted in her attractiveness, folks. However, whether this was misogyny, it was, or if misogyny even exists, it does, wasn't something the man put opposite me was convinced of. His name was Connor Tomlinson. He's a garden variety right-wing streamer and a GB News contributor. Here's what Connor had to say.
Connor, let's pick up on that sort of the labelling of women element of this. Has this specific tone of at times conspiracy-laden, often right-wing, occasionally misogynistic freedom of expression now been let out of the bottle? Is the genie out of the bag, never to go back in? And if so, what does that mean about how some men look at women in society?
Okay, that entire question was just laden with buzzwords which basically mean nothing to anyone who doesn't buy into those presuppositions. Conspiracy-laden, right-wing, are those meant to be insults and pejoratives, or are they just meant to be your value judgment of his positions, which are outside of this statement? We can judge this statement as being offensive.
It's based on what we've seen in America, the sort of the Trumpian politics we've seen,
You're
the
just
framing
throwing
of
out
culture wars.
more like other things. These aren't things that Lawrence has said. How about we focus on the actual statement rather than making it too broad? If I can actually say something to Moya, this is a question. Okay, I agree. It's totally understandable to interpret what Lawrence has said as offensive. So, from what Ava said to me, for something that she wasn't investigated for over a year ago, she's still invited onto networks, the same show by Piers. Piers came out and defended her for this. Ava said that women should be able to weaponize false rape allegations in order to keep men afraid of actually committing sexual assault. And when I questioned this, she implied that myself and my friends would only be afraid of this if we are potential rapists. She suffered no repercussions for that. So, do you agree that if misogynistic insults and misogynistic remarks are offensive and they shouldn't be allowed on air, misandric, man-hating remarks and encouraging a culture of fear that means that young men are terrified of asking out young women should also not be allowed? Should Ava suffer consequences for that?
Sorry, I don't understand why we're discussing this when we're talking about the culture of misogyny that is endemic in society.
Because
I don't understand why you've turned it onto a silly little incident, which I watched, by the way, and it wasn't represented in the way that you're talking about it. I think it was a clumsy remark from her, but she was there. She was present. You were both present. You were having a discussion. This is talking. Ava is not even actually the focus almost of this. She could have been any woman that Lawrence Fox was talking about, that Dan Wootton was talking about. The point is that misogyny was used as an entertainment vehicle. And the most humiliating thing they could think of to say about a woman journalist was that they wouldn't have sex with her.
The incident Connor Tomlinson is referring to there, by the way, happened on Talk TV last year. Yeah, he makes the rounds. Ava Evans doesn't say anything of the sort. She says, quote, "I think men should be frightened to touch women in ways they're not comfortable with," and then says she wouldn't be friends with people who would have rape allegations made about them, which is, I think, very, very different from endorsing making false rape allegations. But that's what Connor heard. Now, by this stage, you might imagine the bottom of the barrel nature of the discussion was wearing on me. I imagine it's wearing on you. But the conditions of the interview were about to prove the point I was making about gender inequality.
Structurally, we face things like misogyny, which put us in a much less powerful position. And when we're in economic dire straits like the country is now, what we know is that poverty fuels things like misogyny, it fuels things like racism, it fuels marginalized demographics suffer the most when people feel economically squeezed. This is part of a wider question of where Britain is going right now. And the fact that we're having this polarized discussion once again, which is getting boiled down into these individual incidents, rather than looking at the broader picture, Lawrence Fox and what Lawrence Fox felt enabled to say is because of a much wider picture. And it's tiring to me. It's so tiring to me as a woman to come on here.
I'm sorry you're so exhausted to be paid to go on air.
I'm not paid. I'm not being paid for this interview. I came on because I wanted to talk about the problem of misogyny and the degradation of women in public life. Are you getting paid for this? I'm not getting paid for this. Are you getting paid for this?
That was the moment I realised that the man who was invited onto Sky News to say that misogyny didn't exist was getting paid for the interview when I wasn't. Now, Connor finished that up by essentially asking me to explain who invented patriarchy, and I would love to know.
Where was patriarchy not existing? This is an important question because you're basically accusing pretty much every civilization before we could even translate each other's languages and communicate with each other, being set up in the same way against women.
Where have you got that from? You're pulling this out your
What
bum.
is your conception? I'm not. What is the conception of patriarchy you're accusing? And also, how does this feed?
Coming on here to talk about incident or GV News and wider societal misogyny.
You're the one that broadened it out.
Asking me to do a history of gender. Where is patriarchy?
You broadened it out. You made the accusation, the burden of proof.
I said it's a social problem, which it is in Britain. It's a social problem.
Okay, and who's engineering the social problem? This is the thing. As soon as you
is there a specific person who's engineering this problem rather than it's baked into structures and has developed over the years? What is this?
I wish I told him the truth, that there's a little man behind a curtain who controls all the patriarchy. And if you learn his real name, he'll grant you 3 wishes. That is a Novara Media exclusive. Now, not only did it transpire Connor was getting paid and I wasn't, but I was initially offered a compensatory fee of £75, the standard for interview like that. However, after an apology from Sky, this was up to £200. Why? Because it turned out Connor had bagged a £200 fee for that 10 30-minute chat. Just think about that for a minute. Man gets paid £200 to deny that structural misogyny exists. Woman gets paid nothing. Meanwhile, the Lawrence Fox GB News clip that sparked this all was Fox denying the gender pay gap exists. This really does write itself. Emma, has anything along these lines ever been your experience with broadcast media?
Oh my God, like that was so hard to watch. Like he is literally, to use an Irish phrase, just talking out of his hole. Like the state of discourse is just, whew. You smashed it though. This adversarial, gladiatorial sort of arena where generally you have one person who knows what they're talking about, you know, has a degree of like informed opinion, expertise even, and another person representing the other side for the sake of balance, who's literally like talking out of their hole. It's not really about furthering discourse or understand. That was not about furthering an understanding of misogyny or how it operates, you know, in society. It's again just about creating this sensationalist kind of, gladiatorial arena. And it's all just kind of like clickbaity and emotive and outrage. It's not about changing anybody's mind or teaching anything. And I just think the state of our public discourse is absolutely dire. And I feel that like I think you wrote an article actually like about the state of opinion recently. And I feel like even where there are people who don't necessarily have like the most egregious ideas, the quality of there's so much uninformed opinion, you know, there's so much stuff being put out by people who have a loose grasp of what they're what they're supposed to be talking about. And I think it has again just really serious like implications for kind of the level of public consciousness and understanding of all of the deep social malaise that we are currently experiencing and should be grappling with, but find it very difficult to kind of come up with solutions or to redress, because most people don't really know what's going on or what we're even talking about or what the parameters of it are.
I totally agree. And one of the reasons that I was, I haven't gone into one of those gladiatorial debates, as you so articulately put it, for a long time is because I simply refuse to do them. I basically have to be tricked into doing them because I don't think they add anything to our public discourse, or, the framing of these discussions is so, I hate the word, but toxic to people at home who are watching it in their understanding of politics and how we should be like approaching these issues. They go back to the same old things time and time again. Oh, let's talk about free speech. Are we too woke? Blah, blah, blah. That is not pushing discourse forward. So when I get trapped into one of these discussions, I try and reframe it a little bit. But, this segment has been focused on an experience I've had. But like Ava Evans said about the Lawrence Fox incident, this isn't really about me. There's several different things going on here. One is sort of the production entertainment value that we are seeing take precedent in our mainstream media. And the other is misogyny and gender inequality, which is obviously the pay issue. Everyone worked as cogs to get Connor paid for talking bunkum and not me. When I first said, why is he getting paid a fee? Then they're like, oh, he asked. And you have to understand in the first place, I wouldn't ask for a fee for a 10-minute chat. And people are like, well, you should. But there's a socialization there, which means you don't tend to. And this is something that people have been talking to me about today, who tend to be from, I will say, marginalized demographics more often than not, or feel in some way that they are not entitled to this fee. But the fact that Connor asked for a fee and asked for £200, why would Sky News not immediately offer parity? There's all these different levels there. And there was also a bit where they tried to say, well, this didn't happen. And then they had to ring up and apologize and say, well, actually, he's getting £200. Sorry, we're going to give you that too. And I did say this online, and I'm saying it here not to try and signal anything virtuous about myself, but just so it's on record, I will be donating that fee to an organisation called Beyond Equality, which does really good work and programs at educating young men into a positive form of masculinity rather than following a patriarchal type, because I feel that is the most apt thing to do. But real food for thought there, because how do we engage with these mainstream media platforms? Should we engage at all? It's a question on the left that is ongoing. There was a great chat yesterday on Novara Live between Michael, who is a GB News commentator, and Rivka, who thinks that maybe we shouldn't engage with GB News as a platform. And I think that those kind of ongoing conversations, actually having them in these spaces, is very, very useful. I would love to hear what people at home think about engaging with platforms, whether they're sort of mainstream, presented as centre platforms like Sky News, or really overt right-wing platforms like GB News. As the left, should we be going there and making our arguments? As the left, what should we engage in? Where's our limitations? Things that I have not yet got a specific answer for, but all I know is Beyond Equality is getting a great payday thanks to Connor Tomlinson, who could have done with that kind of education when he was younger.